So today, we're diving headfirst into the source material you all gave us. It's all about narrative structure, breathing life into your characters, and unleashing that creative beast we all have inside. Oh, and by the way, you can download the full source material from our Patreon page. Let's kick things off with narrative structure.
Yeah, and narrative structure is often explained in a way that makes it sound super intimidating, but it's really just about understanding the journey of your story. The beginning, the middle, the end, and all those little bits of conflict and resolution you sprinkle in along the way.
Right, it's like a roadmap for your story.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be super complicated, though. One of the sources we looked at actually used this analogy about a tiny dragon trying to bake a cake.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
So the dragon's your protagonist, right? And the cake is their goal. All those hilarious challenges they face along the way, like, I don't know, their lack of thumbs, making cracking eggs a total nightmare. Well, that's your plot. But now that I think about it, that analogy isn't really telling us why we need narrative structure.
That's a good point. What really matters is that a clear structure helps keep your reader glued to the page. Think about it. What does your character want? What's standing in their way? And how do those obstacles create that delicious tension that keeps people hooked?
It's all about the tension, right? Like, you're reading a good thriller, and you're just constantly guessing what's going to happen next. Narrative structure is what drives that.
Exactly. And speaking of keeping things interesting, one source really emphasized the importance of conflict, both internal and external. So our little dragon might be struggling with self-doubt, questioning if they can even bake a cake in the first place, all while dealing with, like, a broken oven or a mischievous cat trying to steal the batter.
Haha. I love that mischievous cat. Just throws a little chaos into the mix. But it's true. Conflict is what drives your story. Without it, things just fall flat.
Absolutely. And you can use conflict to raise the stakes, too. What happens if our little dragon doesn't manage to bake that cake? Maybe they disappoint their granny or miss out on a big baking competition. Suddenly, the whole story has more meaning, more depth.
Okay, so we've got this determined little dragon facing down a baking challenge with Granny's expectations looming large. What's next?
Well, a story's only as good as its characters, right? And something that really resonated with me from one of the sources was this idea of going beyond just names and appearances. Give them quirks.
Quirks. Okay, so, like, our dragon collects bottle caps. Only drinks tea with a crazy straw.
See? Exactly. It's those little details that make them feel real. It's not just any dragon trying to bake a cake. It's a dragon who hums show tunes while they whisk and has a secret stash of sprinkles.
I love it. But it's not just about being quirky. It's about flaws, too, right? No one wants a perfect hero. One of the sources suggested really embracing imperfections. Give your character let them make mistakes. That's what makes them relatable.
Exactly. We all mess up sometimes, right? We all have insecurities. Seeing that in a character, even a dragon, just makes them feel more human, and that's how you make your readers care about their journey.
So we've got this flawed, quirky dragon on a mission to bake this cake. But how do we really climb inside their head and figure out what they're thinking?
One source had this simple but brilliant exercise. Write a journal entry from your character's perspective. It doesn't even have to be part of the story, but it really forces you to step into their shoes, understand their motivations, their fears, all of it.
That's brilliant. It's like method acting, but for writers. And it doesn't have to be super serious either. It could be a hilarious rant about the injustice of thumbs or a heartfelt ode to sprinkles.
There you go. Remember, this isn't about writing a perfect first draft. It's about exploration. One source compared it to dumping a box of Legos on the floor before you start building. It's messy, sure, but it's where you begin. You don't expect a perfect Lego castle to just magically appear, do you?
Definitely not. It's all about building that foundation and then refining it. Speaking of refining, how do we get those creative juices flowing? Sometimes it feels like the wells run dry.
One suggestion that really stood out to me was to switch mediums. If you're stuck writing, try drawing your character, maybe composing a song from their perspective, or even narrating your walk to work like it's a scene from a fantasy novel.
I love that. Just break free from the routine. Another source suggested the what-if game. Pick a totally random object and ask a ridiculous question. What if this pen was actually a magic wand? What if my coffee mug could talk?
It sounds silly, but sometimes forcing yourself to think outside the box like that can spark those unexpected ideas and help you break out of a rut.
Okay, I'm grabbing my coffee mug right now just in case it's got some story ideas. It is pretty strong coffee after all.
And don't forget to feed your imagination. One of the sources really stressed how important it is to consume all sorts of creative content. It's like a buffet for your brain, books, movies, music, video games, even people watching. It all adds to that well of inspiration.
So true. It's all about making those connections, seeing how different creative elements can spark something new.
Mm,
Now let's get down to brass tacks. Say you're staring at that blank page feeling totally stuck. This deep dive has some awesome exercises to get you moving, and I'm really intrigued by the one about giving your character a bizarre secret. What are your thoughts?
It's such a great way to add depth and some real surprise to your characters. Like imagine you have this totally fearless warrior, right? But their secret is that they're absolutely terrified of butterflies.
Ooh, that's brilliant. Suddenly, a scene in a beautiful meadow becomes a total psychological thriller for this character.
Exactly. It makes you think outside the box, you know? How does that secret affect everything they do? Their choices, their relationships. What lengths will they go to hide that fear, and how will it eventually be revealed?
Okay, that one's going straight into my notebook. What other exercises caught your eye?
Oh, there's this really fun one where you try to outline a short story as a haiku. Just 17 syllables total.
Wow, that's a serious constraint. But I can see how it would force you to really focus on the core of the story. What does your character want? What's the big obstacle? And what's the outcome? All distilled into this tiny, poetic form.
It's like a pressure cooker for creativity. And for those who struggle with coming up with ideas in the first place, there's the 10 Ideas Challenge.
Ooh, tell me more about that one.
It's super simple, but surprisingly effective. Every single day, you write down 10 random story ideas. It doesn't matter how crazy or outlandish they seem. The point is just to get those creative synapses firing, to break free from that fear of judgment and just let those ideas flow.
That was like a mental workout for your imagination. I like it. You never know what gems might be hiding in those seemingly ridiculous ideas.
Exactly. It's all about flexing that creative muscle. And speaking of getting unstuck, this deep dive also had a 5-sentence story starter for those times when you're staring at a blank page feeling totally frozen.
Yes. Give us the magic formula.
It's all about breaking things down into manageable steps. Ready?
Hit me with it.
Sentence 1. What does your protagonist want most?
Okay, so let's say our protagonist is this struggling musician, and they dream of playing at this legendary music festival.
Perfect. Sentence 2. What's their biggest obstacle?
Maybe they're super shy, terrified of performing in front of a big crowd, or maybe there's a rival musician who's sabotaging their efforts.
Ooh, intrigue. Sentence 3. Is there a potential solution? A mentor figure, maybe.
Maybe they run into a seasoned musician who sees their potential and offers to mentor them. Or maybe they discover a hidden talent that gives them the confidence they need.
Nice. Now, sentence 4. Raise the stakes. What happens if they fail?
If they fail, they might miss their big break. Or worse, they could let down everyone who believed in them.
And finally, sentence 5. How does it all end?
Let's go with a triumphant ending. They overcome their fears, outshine their rival, and deliver a totally show-stopping performance that launches their career.
See, 5 sentences and you've got the bones of a story. Now you can take those sentences and flesh them out. Add details, deepen the conflict, breathe life into those characters.
It's like building a house, starting with a frame and then adding all the details that make it a home.
Exactly. And hey, don't forget, you can download the full source material with all these tips and exercises from our Patreon page. It's a treasure trove of writing wisdom.
Speaking of wisdom, one thing that really resonated with me was the emphasis on reading widely. It's like fuel for the creative engine, isn't it?
Absolutely. One source was really adamant about exploring different genres, different styles. It's not just about reading for pleasure, it's about studying the craft, paying attention to how other writers use language, structure their stories, develop their characters. It's like a masterclass in storytelling, but without even realizing it.
And it doesn't have to be limited to books either. Short stories, essays, poems, even song lyrics, anything that sparks your interest and gets those creative gears turning.
Don't forget movies and TV shows. They're visual narratives, so paying attention to pacing, dialogue, character development, all that stuff can be super insightful for writers.
One source even suggested trying to write a scene from a movie or TV show as a short story. It's fun exercise in translating that visual storytelling into written form, focusing on what makes a scene compelling and engaging.
Speaking of exercises, there's one from the source material about interviewing your characters that I absolutely loved.
Wait, like a job interview?
Exactly. Pretend you're sitting down with your character and asking them all sorts of questions. Their past, their dreams, fears, favorite foods, pet peeves, anything you can think of to really get to know them.
It's like therapy for your characters. And it doesn't have to be serious either. Imagine grilling your dragon on their sprinkle addiction or their questionable taste in show tunes.
Exactly. It's all about uncovering those hidden layers, those little quirks that make them feel real and relatable.
And speaking of getting visual, one source recommended creating a mood board for your characters.
Oh, mood boards are the best. It's like creating a visual representation of your character, a collage of images, colors, textures, maybe even quotes that capture their personality, their style, their vibe.
It's like building a Pinterest board for your character, but with a deeper purpose. It can be so helpful for visualizing them and keeping things consistent throughout the story.
Now let's circle back to narrative structure for a minute, specifically that three-act structure we were talking about earlier, beginning, middle, and end.
Right, the classic hero's journey. But how do we make sure each act is engaging and keeps those pages turning?
One source really hammered home the importance of a strong opening, something that grabs the reader's attention right from the start and makes them want to keep reading. It's like the first bite of an amazing meal that leaves you craving more.
So how do we create that irresistible first bite?
Well, there are a few approaches. You could start with action, with conflict, just plunge the reader right into the heart of the story. Or you could introduce a compelling character with a unique voice, a different perspective.
One source suggested starting with a question, a mystery that piques the reader's curiosity. Like, who left the cryptic message on the dragon's doorstep?
Intriguing. Another approach is to start with a really vivid sensory detail. Create an immersive experience that draws the reader right into that world.
Like, the aroma of burnt sugar and singed scales filled the air as the dragon surveyed the kitchen disaster.
Perfect. And don't forget about setting the tone. Whether it's suspenseful, humorous, introspective, that opening should establish the mood and atmosphere of your story.
Okay, so we've hooked the reader with a killer opening. Now, how do we keep that momentum going in the middle of the story?
That's where the conflict really escalates, the stakes get higher, and your characters face all sorts of new challenges and obstacles. Think of it like a roller coaster ride. You're climbing higher and higher, just waiting for those thrilling drops and twists.
So how do we keep our readers strapped in, holding on tight?
One source talked about introducing twists and turns, unexpected events that keep those pages turning. Could be a sudden revelation, a betrayal, a change in circumstances, even a shift in the character's perspective.
Ooh, I love a good plot twist. It's like throwing a wrench in the gears, forcing everyone, the characters and the reader, to reevaluate everything.
Exactly. And don't forget about pacing. The middle of the story has to maintain a sense of momentum, propelling the reader forward and building toward that climax.
So it's a balance between action and intrigue, keeping the reader on the edge of their seat without rushing the journey.
Exactly. And remember those quieter moments, too. The moments of reflection, the character interactions, they provide contrast, Allow the reader to catch their breath and process everything before the next wave of action or suspense hits.
It's like the calm before the storm. Those quiet moments can be just as powerful.
Absolutely. Speaking of powerful moments, let's talk about the climax. That pivotal moment where the conflict reaches its peak and the characters face their biggest challenge.
It's like the grand finale of a fireworks display. All that buildup, all that tension, and then boom.
The climax has to be both exciting and satisfying. It has to deliver a sense of resolution, but also leave the reader with a lasting impression.
So it's about paying off those emotional investments and making the reader feel like the journey was worth it?
Exactly. And after the climax comes the resolution. That's where we see the consequences of the character's actions, the impact of the conflict. We tie up loose ends, answer lingering questions, offer closure.
Like the final scene of a movie. We see those characters moving forward, changed by their experiences.
Exactly. One source really emphasized that the resolution has to feel earned. It can't be rushed or contrived. It has to flow naturally from everything that came before.
Like landing a plane smoothly. Bringing that story to a satisfying conclusion that feels both inevitable and surprising.
Now, let's dig into some specific techniques for developing your characters, starting with dialogue. We touched on it earlier, but dialogue is crucial for revealing personality, relationships, motivations, the whole 9 yards.
Right, but it's not just about what the characters say, it's how they say it. Their tone, word choice, even the pauses and silences, they can all speak volumes.
One source suggested imagining your characters as actors on a stage. Each one has a unique voice, a physical presence. How do they move? How do they interact with their surroundings? What are their little quirks and mannerisms?
It's like painting a portrait with words, using language to create a really vivid image of your character.
Another technique is to pay attention to subtext, the unspoken meaning behind the words. What are your characters really thinking and feeling? What are they hiding? What are they trying to reveal?
Adding those layers of subtext keeps the reader engaged, makes them think. They're constantly trying to read between the lines, decipher those hidden meanings.
Now let's talk point of view. That's the perspective from which your story is told.
Right, like first person, where the narrator is a character of the story, or third person, where the narrator is an outside observer.
Exactly. And your choice of point of view can drastically affect the reader's experience, how they understand the characters and events.
First person creates a sense of intimacy, of immediacy. You experience the story right alongside the character. But it also limits the reader's perspective. You only get that single character's thoughts and observations.
While third person offers a wider lens, the narrator can dip into the thoughts and feelings of multiple characters.
One of the sources we dug into actually suggested playing around with different points of view, just to see how it changes the tone, the pacing, the overall feel of your story.
It's like choosing a different lens for your camera. Each one gives you a unique perspective on the same subject.
Now, let's talk about showing versus telling. This is storytelling 101, right?
Okay.
It's all about engaging the reader's senses and imagination, not just handing them facts or information.
So instead of telling the reader, this character is sad, you show it. Their actions, their body language, their words, even the way they interact with their surroundings.
It's like the difference between watching a movie and just reading a summary of the plot. Showing allows the reader to really experience the story, to draw their own conclusions.
One source recommended using vivid sensory details to really bring those scenes to life. Instead of just saying, it was a cold day, you describe that biting wind, the crunch of snow underfoot, the icy breath fogging the air.
Those details paint a picture in the reader's mind. You're not just telling them it's cold, you're making them feel it.
Exactly. And it's not just visual. Either engage all the senses, sound, smell, touch, even taste, to create a truly immersive experience.
Okay, so we've got our characters, our setting, our plot, and we're showing, not telling. But what about the villains? How do we make those antagonists believable and compelling?
The most effective villains often have their own motivations, their own goals, even justifications for their actions. They're not just evil for the sake of being evil. They have reasons for what they do, even if those reasons are twisted or misguided.
It's like that saying, every villain is the hero of their own story. Understanding their perspective, even if we don't agree with it, can make them so much more interesting and even relatable.
One source suggested really digging into the villain's backstory, understanding their wounds, their traumas, their experiences, the things that shaped their worldview. It can help us empathize with them, even as we're rooting for their downfall.
It's about humanizing the villain, showing that they're not just a cardboard cutout of evil. They're a complex individual with their own history, their own motivations.
And don't forget to give your villain strengths and weaknesses. Even the most powerful villain should have vulnerabilities. It makes them more relatable and ultimately beatable.
It's those vulnerabilities that make them more human, more interesting. And speaking of making things believable, even in a world of dragons and magic, research can be crucial, can't it?
Absolutely. One source recommended researching everything, even if you're writing fantasy or science fiction, historical periods, cultural customs, scientific principles, technological advancements, everything.
It's about grounding your story in reality, even
Yeah.
if you're creating a world that's completely different from our own.
And it's not just about accuracy. Research can spark new ideas, inspire unexpected twists, and even add a layer of depth and authenticity to your writing.
So research is like a secret weapon for writers, helping us build worlds and characters that feel real, even when they're fantastical. Now let's talk about some practical tips for dealing with those pesky writing challenges we all face, starting with the dreaded writer's block.
Ugh, writer's block. It's like hitting a brick wall in the middle of your creative flow. One source suggested trying free writing. Just write continuously. Don't stop to edit or think. Just get those words flowing, even if they're total gibberish.
It's like clearing the cobwebs out of your brain, just letting the words spill out without judgment.
Exactly. And sometimes all you need is a change of scenery. Get out of your usual writing space, go for a walk, visit a museum, even just rearrange your furniture. A fresh perspective can work wonders.
And if you're stuck on a particular scene or chapter, try skipping ahead and writing a different part.
Yeah.
You don't have to write in chronological order.
It's like working on a jigsaw puzzle. Sometimes you need to focus on a different section before the pieces start to fit together.
And sometimes the best thing you can do is just step away for a bit. Take a break, recharge, come back with fresh eyes.
Now, let's talk about another challenge. Self-doubt. We all have that little voice whispering, this is garbage, or you're not a real writer. It can be brutal.
Oh, that inner critic is relentless. How do we silence those negative voices?
One source suggested focusing on the process, not the outcome. Remind yourself that writing is a journey, not a destination. Every word you write is a step forward.
It's about celebrating those little victories, acknowledging the progress you've made. Give yourself permission to make mistakes along the way.
And don't forget to celebrate those small wins. Finishing a chapter, writing a scene that really sings, hitting your daily word count, they're all accomplishments.
It's like a high five for every step you take toward your writing goals.
Another helpful tip is to surround yourself with supportive people. People who believe in your writing, who encourage you. Find a writing group. Connect with other writers online. Even just share your work with a trusted friend or family member who can give you constructive feedback.
Having that support system can make a world of difference, especially when you're feeling discouraged.
And remember, writing is personal. It's subjective. What one person loves, another might hate. The key is to write the story that you want to tell, the story that resonates with you.
It's about finding your voice, your style, your audience, and trusting your instincts.
Now, speaking of style and voice, let's talk about developing those. One source recommended reading widely, paying attention to how different authors use language, how they create mood, atmosphere, how they bring their characters to life.
It's like studying the brushstrokes of a master painter, learning from their techniques and adapting them to your own vision.
Another tip is to experiment. Try different genres, different writing styles. Dip your toes into poetry, flash fiction, even screenwriting. It helps you stretch those creative muscles and discover new ways of using language.
It's like trying on different hats. See which ones fit your personality and your writing goals.
And don't be afraid to break the rules. There are no hard and fast rules in writing, only guidelines. The best writing often comes from those who dare to push boundaries, to experiment with form, structure, and language.
So it's about blazing your own trail, finding your own way of expressing yourself, and not being afraid to take risks.
Now, let's talk about revision, one of the most crucial but often dreaded parts of the writing process. It's where you take that raw first draft and polish it into a finished piece, like taking a rough diamond and cutting it, shaping it, polishing it until it sparkles.
So it's about taking that messy first draft and turning it into something beautiful, something cohesive.
Exactly. One tip was to read your work out loud. It can help you catch clunky sentences, awkward phrasing, inconsistencies in tone, things your eyes might miss.
It's like hearing your writing with fresh ears.
Another tip is to get feedback. Find trusted readers who can give you constructive criticism, help you see your work from a different angle.
It's about getting outside eyes on your work, identifying blind spots, and refining your writing based on that feedback.
And don't be afraid to make big changes. Sometimes a whole scene or even a chapter needs to be rewritten or restructured to make the story flow better.
It's about being willing to kill your darlings. You know, those passages or characters you might be attached to, but they just don't serve the story.
Revision is an ongoing process, and it's often where the real magic happens. It's where you refine your ideas, strengthen your characters, and polish your prose until it shines.
Now let's move on to world building. Specifically, the challenge of creating believable and immersive fictional worlds.
One source suggested starting with the basics: geography, climate, history, and culture. These elements provide the foundation for everything else.
It's like building a house.
Yeah.
You need a solid foundation before you can add the walls, the roof, all the details that make it a home.
And you have to think about the rules, the laws that govern your world. Even if it's a world full of magic and mythical creatures, there needs to be a sense of internal consistency, of logic.
Readers are more willing to suspend their disbelief if your world feels like a real place, even if it's populated by dragons and talking animals.
And don't forget those little details. They bring your world to life, make it feel unique. Think about the customs and traditions, the food, the entertainment, the beliefs and values.
It's all about creating a sense of place, a world that feels as real and tangible as our own.
One source talked about world building through conflict. It's about creating challenges and obstacles that are specific to your world, forcing your characters to adapt and overcome them in unique ways.
So instead of just having a generic evil wizard as your antagonist, you create a conflict that's rooted in the history, the culture, even the magical laws of your world.
Exactly. If your world is cursed, your characters might need to figure out how to break that curse or learn to live with it. It adds excitement, raises the stakes, and helps you explore all those nuances of your world.
It makes the conflict feel like it belongs there, not just something happening on top of it.
Now let's talk about genre, the category of story you're telling. Fantasy, science fiction, romance, mystery, horror, whatever it may be.
Understanding those genre conventions can help you meet reader expectations, craft a story that fits within a certain framework.
But remember, genres aren't rigid boxes. You can blend them, subvert expectations, and create something totally new.
One source encouraged writers to play around with different genres,
Yeah.
borrowing elements from one and incorporating them into another. It can lead to some really fresh and exciting stories that defy categorization.
It's all about pushing boundaries, creating those hybrid stories that surprise and delight your readers.
Now let's touch on theme. That's the underlying message or idea that your story explores.
Themes can be universal, like love, loss, betrayal, redemption, or they can be specific to your story, to your characters.
It's about those big ideas your story grapples with, the questions it asks, the values it explores.
One source suggested letting theme emerge organically, let it grow naturally from your characters and your plot.
Yeah.
It's like planting a seed and watching it sprout. You don't force it to grow in a certain direction. You nurture it and let it take its own shape.
So it's about trusting the process, letting the theme reveal itself as you write.
Exactly. And avoid being too heavy-handed. Let the theme simmer beneath the surface. Let the reader draw their own conclusions.
It's about subtlety, about letting the theme resonate with the reader without hitting them over the head with it.
Now, let's talk about some practical tips for writing descriptions. Descriptions are key for bringing your story to life, painting those vivid images, immersing your reader in your world.
It's about using language to create a tangible experience for your reader.
One tip was to use strong verbs and really evocative language. Choose words that not only describe the physical appearance, but also the mood, the atmosphere. So instead of saying, the house was old, you might say, the house sagged under the weight of its years, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin.
That's so much more powerful. You're not just telling us the house is old, you're making us feel it.
Exactly. Another technique is to focus on details that are relevant to the story, to the character's experience. Don't describe everything in exhaustive detail. Choose details that add layers of meaning, that are significant, symbolic.
It's about being selective, choosing details that enhance the story, reveal something about the character, or create that atmosphere.
A well-chosen detail can often say more than pages of exposition.
And sensory details are crucial. Engage all 5 senses, sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, to really immerse your reader.
For example, when you're describing a busy city street, you might include the noise of the traffic, the smell of street food, the grit of the pavement underfoot, even the taste of exhaust fumes in the air.
Those details transport the reader. They're right there in the middle of it all.
It's all about creating that sense of place, making it feel real.
Now let's talk about symbolism. Symbolism is such a powerful tool. It's about using objects, images, actions to represent abstract ideas or concepts.
Like a white dove symbolizing peace, a red rose symbolizing love, or a storm symbolizing turmoil.
Right. Those symbols add layers of meaning. They create a sense of depth and resonance that goes beyond the literal.
One source recommended using symbolism sparingly, organically. Let it emerge naturally from your story. Don't force it.
The best symbols are the ones that resonate on a subconscious level. They evoke emotions and associations without you having to spell it out.
Now let's talk about dialogue tags. Those little phrases like he said or she asked that identify the speaker.
Right, and one common mistake is using too many adverbs in those tags, like he said angrily or she whispered softly. It can feel clunky and redundant. You're telling the reader what to think instead of showing them.
It's like saying, this joke is funny, instead of just telling the joke and letting the audience decide if they think it's funny.
Exactly. One source recommended using strong verbs instead, like he snapped or she hissed. Much more evocative and concise.
Another tip is to vary the placement of your tags. Put them at the beginning, middle, or end of the sentence to create a more natural flow.
And sometimes you can even omit the tags altogether if it's clear who's speaking from the context.
Now let's talk about dialogue as action. This is about using dialogue to do more than just convey information. It should reveal character, advance the plot, create conflict.
So instead of having a character say, I'm angry, you might show their anger through their words and actions. Maybe they slam their fist on the table or storm out of the room.
Exactly. It makes the dialogue dynamic and engaging. It adds those layers of meaning and subtext.
It's about using dialogue to do more than just tell us what's happening. It reveals character, builds tension, moves that plot forward.
Now let's talk about romance. Writing a love story that feels genuine, compelling, not cheesy or contrived can be tricky.
Romance can be a minefield, for sure. How do we avoid those cliches and create a love story that readers will actually believe in?
One source really stressed building a strong foundation for the relationship. Show how those characters connect, not just physically, but emotionally and intellectually.
It's about shared interests, compatible personalities, and a genuine spark of attraction that goes beyond the surface.
And conflict is essential, even in a romance. Create obstacles and challenges that test the relationship. Force those characters to work together, to communicate, to strengthen their bond.
It shows that love isn't always easy.
Mhm.
It takes effort, compromise, and a willingness to overcome those challenges together.
Conflict is the crucible in which true love is forged.
And don't forget those little moments of intimacy, of tenderness. They add so much depth and authenticity to the relationship.
It's those small gestures, the shared glances, the inside jokes that really reveal how deep that connection goes.
Now, let's lighten things up a bit and talk about humor. Humor is such a powerful tool in storytelling. It can create a whole range of effects, from lighthearted amusement to biting satire.
One source said that the key to good humor is surprise. An unexpected twist, a clever wordplay, a sudden shift in perspective. Those things can really catch the reader off guard and make them laugh.
It's all about subverting expectations, playing with language, finding the funny side of the unexpected.
Exaggeration and absurdity can work really well, too. Take a situation or a character trait and push it to the extreme.
Like our dragon who becomes obsessed with collecting rubber duckies. Their hoard takes over their entire lair.
Exactly. And timing is crucial. You have to deliver that punchline at just the right moment. A well-placed pause or a build-up can make all the difference.
It's like a perfectly timed drum roll. Build that anticipation and then bam, deliver the laugh.
Another technique is humor through character, creating characters who are just inherently funny, either through their personalities, their dialogue, or the situations they find themselves in.
So it's not just about telling jokes. It's about building characters who are walking, talking sources of amusement.
Exactly. You could have a character who's relentlessly optimistic, one who takes everything literally, or one who's constantly stumbling into ridiculous situations.
Like our dragon, who, despite their fear of butterflies, decides to open a butterfly sanctuary in their lair inn. Chaos and hilarity ensue.
Perfect. Those characters add a layer of levity, even when things get serious or dramatic.
Now let's switch gears to suspense. The art of keeping those readers on the edge of their seats, wondering what's going to happen next.
One source recommended creating a sense of anticipation, a feeling of uncertainty, hint at danger or conflict, but don't reveal too much too soon. It's like slowly tightening a screw, building that tension.
It's all about that delicious dread. You know something bad is coming, but you don't know what or when.
Cliffhangers are a classic technique. End a chapter or a scene on a note of suspense, and the reader is dying to know what happens next.
It's like leaving them hanging off a cliff, metaphorically speaking. Will they survive the fall?
And pacing plays a huge role. Suspense is all about controlling the flow of information, speeding things up, slowing them down, to create that sense of urgency and anticipation.
Like playing with the tempo of a song, building to a crescendo, then dropping back down to a whisper before building up again.
Another technique is suspense through character. Create characters who are in danger, who are facing tough choices. Put them in situations where the stakes are high and the outcome is uncertain.
So it's not just about external threats. It's about those internal conflicts that create suspense and keep us guessing.
Exactly. When the reader is invested in those characters, they experience the suspense right alongside them.
Now let's dive into world building again. Specifically, creating believable and immersive fictional cultures.
One source recommended starting with the building blocks. Language, customs, traditions, beliefs, values, all those things shape how people interact, their worldview, their understanding of the world.
It's about creating a sense of identity, a shared set of beliefs and practices that define a group of people.
And history and geography play a huge role, too. How did those factors influence the development of the culture? What major events and conflicts shaped their society?
It's about grounding your culture in a sense of history, of place, showing how it evolved over time.
And don't forget about arts and entertainment. What kind of music do they enjoy? What are their stories, their legends? What are their forms of artistic expression?
It's those details that add richness and depth, make the culture feel more real.
One source talked about cultural immersion. It's about really immersing yourself in the culture you're creating. Research real-world cultures, draw inspiration from their customs and traditions.
It's like taking a virtual trip, experiencing that way of life firsthand, and using that knowledge to build your fictional world.
You could even create a cultural dictionary outlining key terms, phrases, and concepts. It's like a travel guide for your readers, helping them navigate the complexities of your fictional world.
That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
And it ensures consistency and accuracy as you're writing. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about fight scenes. They can be so thrilling, so action-packed. but they can also be really tricky to get right.
One tip was to focus on the physicality of the fight. Describe the movements, the sounds, the sensations in detail.
So it's not just about saying they fought. It's about making the reader feel those punches, those blocks, those grunts of exertion.
Exactly. It's like choreographing a dance. Pay attention to the rhythm, the flow, the impact of each move.
And the stakes have to be clear. Why are they fighting? What happens if one wins or loses?
Those stakes add emotional weight. It's not just a meaningless brawl.
And we can't forget about the internal conflict happening within those characters. What are they thinking? What emotions are driving them? Fear, rage, determination.
Absolutely. Those internal struggles add layers, make the scene more engaging.
I'm curious about a technique that was mentioned, slow motion fight scenes. What's that all about?
It's a cool technique where you slow down the action, focus on a few key moments or movements in detail. It creates this heightened sense of awareness, of tension. You really experience the weight and impact of each action.
It's like when they use slow motion in movies to emphasize a crucial blow or a really emotional moment.
Exactly. And it can be especially effective for conveying the emotional and psychological impact of a fight, not just the physical violence.
Speaking of emotional impact, let's talk about writing those heart-wrenching, tear-jerking moments, those scenes that stick with the reader long after they finish the book.
One source really stressed the importance of honesty in those moments. Allow yourself to feel those emotions as you write. Be vulnerable. Be authentic.
It's about tapping into those raw human emotions and putting them on the page.
And remember, show, don't tell. Instead of saying, she was sad, you describe her trembling lip, her tear-filled eyes, the way her shoulders slump.
Those physical details are so much more powerful than just stating the emotion.
And sometimes, words just aren't enough. Don't underestimate the power of silence. A shared look, a hesitant touch, a moment of quiet contemplation can say so much.
It's all about those unspoken moments, those subtle gestures.
One source talked about emotional layering, which I found really interesting.
What's that all about?
It's about building the emotional intensity gradually, layering one emotion on top of another until it reaches a peak.
Because instead of a character going from
0 to heartbroken in an instant, you show the progression of their feelings, how one emotion builds on another.
So it's like adding different instruments to a piece of music. You build this complex emotional symphony.
That layering just makes the scene more nuanced, more impactful, and so much more memorable.
Okay, let's wade into the tricky waters of backstory. It's such an important part of character development, but it can be so hard to handle it well.
Oh, absolutely. Backstory, that's a character's past, all those events and experiences that shaped who they are today. It can add depth and richness, but you have to use it carefully, strategically.
I've read so many stories where the backstory felt like an info dump. It just overwhelmed the story.
That's the danger. One source suggested weaving backstory into the present narrative organically. Little hints, flashbacks, snippets of dialogue.
So you're kind of teasing out those pieces of the past, letting them emerge naturally as the story unfolds.
And what's really cool is how backstory can illuminate a character's motivations, their fears, their choices. It's like uncovering the roots of a tree. You can see how its past has shaped its present form.
And you have to make sure that backstory actually serves the present story. It needs to add relevance, give meaning to a character's actions and choices.
One source called it backstory as motivation. Those past events directly influence what the character wants and why they do the things they do.
So a character who was betrayed in the past might be super loyal now, or maybe they struggle to trust anyone.
Exactly. Backstory can add so much psychological depth to your characters, make them feel more real, make their actions more believable.
Okay, let's shift focus to setting. How do we create those believable, immersive urban environments? Cities are bursting with stories, just waiting to be told.
One source said, do your research, explore real cities, study the architecture, the culture, the history, the social dynamics. Let all those observations feed into your fictional world.
It's about capturing the essence of city life, that energy, the diversity, the secrets hidden in plain sight.
And remember those senses. Describe the sights, sounds, smells, tastes, textures, all those things that make a city unique.
So you're painting a sensory portrait. The grit of the pavement, the smells of street food, the noise of the traffic, the taste of exhaust fumes.
Those details bring the reader right into that city. They're walking those streets alongside your characters.
It's all about that sense of place, making it so real the reader can practically feel the city's pulse.
One source talked about urban layering, which I found fascinating.
Oh, tell me more about that.
It's about creating a city with layers of history, culture, social stratification. You've got the shiny skyscrapers of the wealthy, but also those gritty back alleys. A city is this tapestry of different lives, different experiences.
It's about showing the contrasts, the beauty and the ugliness, the hope and the despair.
And don't forget those hidden corners. The secret spaces, cities are full of surprises, and those unexpected discoveries can add a real sense of mystery to your story.
It's those hidden gems, those off-the-beaten-path places that reveal the true character of a city.
Now let's take a deep breath and step into nature. Nature can be such an incredible source of inspiration. A backdrop for adventure, romance, even horror.
It's about capturing the majesty, the mystery, that beauty, that raw power.
One source really emphasized approaching nature with respect, with reverence, acknowledge its complexity, its power.
And use those sensory details. Bring it to life for the reader.
The rustling leaves, the bird song, the scent of pine needles, the cool moss on your fingertips, the taste of wild berries.
It's a feast for the senses. The reader experiences that forest, those mountains, that ocean.
One source had this idea of nature as a character, which I thought was really cool.
What does that mean exactly?
It's about giving nature a personality, almost a voice. You personify the wind, the rain, the forest, give them agency, influence over what happens.
So it's not just a passive backdrop, it becomes an active force shaping the story.
Exactly. It can add layers of symbolism, explore themes like nature's power, its indifference to us, its potential for both beauty and destruction.
Okay, now let's venture into the realm of magic systems. They're so fun to create, but it can be tough to make them believable, keep them consistent.
It's easy to get carried away with all the possibilities. But you need rules, limitations, define how your magic works, where the power comes from, its potential for good and evil.
So it's like a set of laws for your magical universe. It's not just a random plot device. It's an integral part of the world.
Another important thing is to explore the consequences, both the good and the bad. How does magic affect society, individuals? What are the ethical implications?
It's about showing the ramifications of magic, how it shapes lives, the choices it forces people to make.
One source talked about hard magic and soft magic.
Oh yeah, I've heard those terms before. But can you refresh my memory?
Sure. Hard magic has really clearly defined rules, limitations. It's more scientific, predictable. Soft magic is more mysterious, unpredictable. It's often more intuitive or spiritual.
Though hard magic is like a formula, while soft magic is more like an art.
Exactly. And which one you choose really depends on the type of story you're telling, your own preferences.
From magic to technology, technology is constantly evolving, so it can be both exciting and intimidating to incorporate into stories.
One source really stressed focusing on the human impact, not just the gadgets themselves. How does technology shape our lives, our relationships, our understanding of the world, our future?
It's about the interplay between technology and humanity, the challenges, the opportunities, the ways it changes who we are.
And avoid getting too technical. Don't bog the story down with jargon. Make it understandable for everyone, even those who aren't tech savvy.
It's a balancing act, finding that sweet spot between accuracy and accessibility.
And don't be afraid to speculate. Science fiction is all about imagining the possibilities. So let your imagination run wild and come up with those new, innovative technologies that could change everything.
It's about pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
There's a technique called technological extrapolation, which I thought was pretty cool. It's basically taking current trends and projecting them into the future. Think about how those technologies might evolve, how they might impact society, how they might change the way we live and interact.
So you're taking those seeds of innovation and imagining how they could blossom into something completely transformative.
Exactly. It can be such a powerful tool for creating stories that really make people think about the implications of technology.
Okay, let's talk about a more challenging topic. Writing about social issues, poverty, inequality, discrimination, environmental degradation, political corruption. These are heavy issues, but they can also be so impactful when explored through fiction.
You're right. These are complex, sensitive topics, but fiction can be a powerful way to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and even get people talking about social change.
It's about using fiction to examine those issues, to explore different perspectives, to challenge the way things are.
One source emphasized approaching these topics with sensitivity and respect. Avoid stereotypes and simplistic solutions. Acknowledge the complexity. Present nuanced perspectives.
It's about showing the human impact of those issues, the challenges and the triumphs.
And make sure to center the stories of those who are most affected. Give them agency. Let their voices be heard. Show their resilience and strength.
It's about amplifying those voices, challenging readers to see the world through different eyes.
And don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. Fiction can be a powerful tool for imagining alternatives, exploring different possibilities, and inspiring hope for a better future.
It's about using fiction to spark change.
One source talked about social commentary through allegory. It's a really interesting technique.
Tell me more.
It's about using fictional characters and events to represent real-world issues, exploring those themes in a symbolic way.
So instead of directly addressing a specific issue, you create a fictional mirror that reflects that issue, letting readers make their own connections.
Exactly. Like a story about a society divided by appearance, which could be an allegory for racism and social inequality.
It's a powerful way to address sensitive topics in a way that's engaging and thought-provoking.
Now, let's go back in time. Let's talk about writing about history. History is full of stories, just waiting to be told.
It's such a fascinating source of inspiration. We get to peek into the past, learn from our mistakes, and remember the power of the human spirit.
One source suggested approaching historical fiction with a mix of accuracy and creativity. Do your research, but also let your imagination fill in those gaps, those untold stories.
It's about bringing the past to life in a way that feels authentic but also engaging.
And choose something that resonates with you, something that sparks your curiosity, fuels your imagination.
It's about finding those historical moments that speak to your heart.
And focus on those smaller, personal stories. That's where we often find the most profound truths. It's about humanizing history, showing how events impact individuals.
It reminds us that history is made up of all those individual stories, and every single one is important.
There's a technique called historical reimagining, which I thought was pretty neat.
What's that all about?
It's about taking a well-known event or figure and reimagining it. Look at it from a different angle, explore alternative scenarios, uncover hidden motives, shed light on those untold stories.
It's about challenging those dominant narratives, offering fresh perspectives.
Like writing a battle scene from a foot soldier's perspective, or a novel about the secret life of a historical figure.
It can offer such a fresh, insightful take on familiar events.
Now let's talk about endings. One of the most crucial and sometimes daunting aspects of storytelling.
Endings are so important. They leave that final impression, that lingering feeling.
One source really emphasized making sure the ending feels earned, satisfying. It needs to be consistent with the tone and themes, offer a sense of closure.
It's about delivering on those promises you made throughout the story. Tying up loose ends, answering questions, giving the reader that sense of completion.
And avoid those deus ex machina endings, those sudden, improbable resolutions that feel like they came out of nowhere.
It's like pulling a plot device out of a hat to magically fix everything.
Exactly. The ending has to flow naturally, feel both inevitable and surprising.
It's about finding that balance, satisfying and unexpected.
And don't forget about resonance. A great ending will stay with the reader. Make them think, make them want to talk about it, even reread the story.
It's about those endings that leave an echo, those images and emotions that stick with you.
One source also mentioned open endings. Those can be really effective too.
Open endings. Tell me more.
They leave some questions unanswered, some threads unresolved. It invites the reader to imagine their own conclusions, their own interpretations. It can be really powerful for stories that deal with complex themes, ambiguous situations.
It's like leaving a door open for the reader, inviting them to step into the story.
Now, as we wrap up our deep dive into creative writing and storytelling, let's talk about the writing process itself. Those practical tips that help us actually get those words down on the page.
Right. It's one thing to talk about all these techniques, but how do we put them into practice?
One source was all about establishing a routine. Set aside time for writing, even just a few minutes each day. Consistency is key.
It's like training for a marathon. You don't start by running 26 miles. You build up gradually.
And create a writing environment that works for you. A space that's free from distractions, a place where you feel creative and focused.
It could be a quiet corner at home, a bustling coffee shop, a cabin in the woods, whatever feels right for you.
And don't underestimate the power of rituals. A
Yeah.
cup of coffee, a specific playlist, a lucky charm. Those little things can signal to your brain, it's writing time.
It's about setting the stage, getting yourself in the right mindset.
One source talked about word sprints, which can be a really great way to break through writer's block.
Word sprints, what are those?
It's super simple. Set a timer for 15 or 20 minutes and just write. Don't stop, don't edit, don't think. Just let the words flow.
So it's like a sprint for your brain. See how much you can get down in a short burst.
It's a fun, effective way to get unstuck, generate new ideas.
And we all know writing can be emotionally and mentally draining, so self-care is super important. We don't want to burn out.
One source talked about doing things that nurture your creativity, spending time in nature, listening to music, reading, taking breaks. It's about taking care of yourself, realizing that writing is a marathon, not a sprint,
It's about pacing yourself, keeping that creative fire burning.
and connect with other writers. Find a writing group, go to workshops, chat with people online. It's so helpful to have a community that understands what you're going through.
It's about finding your tribe, those people who get your writing jokes and understand the struggles and the joys.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned.
It's been such a journey, exploring all those different aspects of storytelling, from narrative structure to character development, world building, evoking emotion. It's been amazing.
Storytelling is such a powerful, essential human impulse. It's how we connect, how we share, how we make sense of the world. So whether you're writing novels, screenplays, poems, or just journaling, embrace the joy of writing, the magic of storytelling.
And remember, this was just a taste. There's so much more to learn, to explore, so keep writing, keep experimenting, keep those creative juices flowing.
If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment letting us know what you'd like us to explore next.
And for those who want to support the show and get access to bonus content, including the full source material for this episode, head over to our Patreon page.
Until next time, happy writing.
Happy writing. Thanks for being a listener. Click the card above to explore our playlist and find more episodes. And hey, if you really appreciate our work and want to help us keep creating awesome content, you can find us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/McAllister. Or if you just want to buy us a coffee, head over to buymecoffee.com/Jamie McAllister. All content, copyright Jamie McAllister.